The story begins with a girl traveling to Alaska to meet her father. She's nervous, clutching an old photo of him that her mother had saved for her. She spends the flight studying his face, afraid they might not recognize each other. In the picture, he looks rugged, standing in the woods with a beard and bright eyes full of laughter. When she arrives and steps off the plane, she searches the small crowd, but he isn't there. Instead, a huge man in a faded yellow baseball cap and puffy jacket is waiting. He looks intimidating but stares at her as if expecting someone. She approaches him, asking if her father sent him. After some confusion over her name, the man confirms he's there to pick her up. He introduces himself as a man who knows her dad, and his warm smile softens his imposing appearance. Though hesitant, she follows him, dragging her bag along as her injured leg makes walking difficult. The man, noticing her struggle, apologizes awkwardly for using the term handicapped, clearly trying not to offend. As they walk to his car, she reflects on her injury from a car accident, and how much her body has struggled to heal. Though she tries to move as naturally as possible, the pain and effort are constant reminders of what she's lost. The man leads her to an old station wagon, cluttered with belongings and smelling faintly of takeout. He clears a spot for her in the front seat, and they begin the drive. She carries little with her, having left most of her belongings in storage after her house was sold. Memories of her past life are locked away, painful to revisit, especially thoughts of her mother, whom she loved deeply. As they drive, she starts to piece together the situation. She realizes she doesn't have many options. Her father's phone number had been disconnected, and her only choice now is to trust this man, even though fear lingers. She resolves to push forward, despite the uncertainty ahead. The girl rides in the car with the large man sent by her father. They travel in silence for a while until she realizes they are heading away from the town where her father supposedly lived. Confused, she asks why they aren't going to his house in town. The man explains that her father doesn't stay there and reassures her that he's taking her to him. Though skeptical, she doesn't argue further, unsure of where they're actually headed. As the car moves farther from civilization, the surroundings become wilder, with fewer houses and more wilderness. The rough road reminds her of the scars on her body, especially her leg. She recalls the long hours it took for doctors to remove glass from her skin after the accident. Her scars, especially the deep ones on her face, often draw stares from strangers. While she feels uncomfortable when people notice her limp, the scars on her face give her a strange sense of power, as she can stare back without feeling helpless. The silence in the car is eventually broken when the man starts singing. His off-key, mumbling tune is impossible to recognize, but it lightens the mood. He turns on the noisy heater as they continue along the bumpy road. Suddenly, a bear appears in the middle of the road. The man slows the car calmly, allowing the bear to dart back into the forest. He remarks on the bear's hasty retreat with a drawn-out, twangy word that makes her laugh unexpectedly. For the first time since her accident and her mother's death, she finds herself genuinely laughing. It feels strange, almost like forcing something rough out of her chest, but it also feels good in a way she hadn't expected. The man's cheerful reaction and their shared laughter ease some of her worries. As they continue driving through the endless wilderness, the tension between them melts away, and an unlikely bond begins to form. By the time they move deeper into the wild landscape, she feels like they've become friends. A young woman struggles to process the chaos around her. She wakes on the shore, surrounded by smoke and rain, with the remnants of a burnt cabin nearby. The gray sky is heavy, the forest vast and unwelcoming, resembling sharp teeth stretching endlessly. Despite the cold rain soaking her, she remains still, unable to think clearly. The night's events are a blur in her mind, filled with pain and loss, but she knows she is alone and must survive. As hunger and thirst gnaw at her, she recalls lessons her father once taught her about survival. He emphasized that cold can kill quickly, so building a shelter is a priority. Thirst follows, making finding water essential. Hunger, though slower, weakens a person, and fire, though vital, comes last. The overwhelming task of survival leaves her paralyzed for a moment, but she forces herself to focus on what she still has. She takes stock of her resources: sturdy boots, warm clothes, a range shell, a few supplies saved from the cabin, a hatchet, some canned food, a rifle, and a bow with arrows. She also has the company of a large wild dog who paces nearby. The dog seems restless, waiting, and though they can't communicate, she finds comfort in not being entirely alone. Her body aches as from head to toe, but she fights through the pain, aided by the last few painkillers she has. She reluctantly takes one, knowing she must conserve the rest. Slowly she eats a bit of canned salmon, though her stomach churns with unease. The dog approaches, hoping for a share, But she refuses at first, realizing her limited food must last. She tosses him some jerky treats she managed to grab, grateful for his presence, despite the harsh circumstances. Her thoughts return to the survival tips her father shared. Memories of him bring pain, but they also remind her of what she must do. She recalls a childhood lesson on building a shelter during a field trip. That memory becomes her guide as she prepares to face the wilderness, knowing that no one is coming to rescue her. She has to act now to stay alive. This young woman recalling a lesson she once learned about building shelters. She remembers creating them by propping up a big branch against a log or rock, then layering smaller branches and leaves to keep the rain out. Reflecting on this memory, she feels a pang of regret for not paying attention to her father's wilderness teachings when she had the chance. Her grief over his death resurfaces, threatening to overwhelm her. She acknowledges that despite her complicated feelings toward him, he was still her father and she loved him. The weight of her loss clashes with her dire situation. She realizes that if she doesn't act, she'll die. This stark truth propels her into action. She forces herself to confront her fear, even shouting it out loud. Her loyal companion, a dog, reacts to her outburst, but she quickly calms him, pulling him close for comfort. The rain intensifies, drumming against her hood and heightening her sense of urgency. She decides her first priority is shelter, knowing she needs something sturdy enough to protect her from the rain and cold. A memory of a leaning boulder her father showed her comes to mind. The spot beneath it was dry, and she recalls its location near some traps they had once checked together. She mentally maps the path from the lake to the boulder, determined to find it despite her injuries. Her damaged body complicates her survival, but she knows she must move carefully to avoid worsening her condition. Gathering only the essentials: a rifle, a hatchet, some clothes, and painkillers, she leaves the rest of her belongings behind. The simple task of walking to the rock feels monumental, given her weakened state. Still, she pushes herself forward, relying on sheer determination. With her dog by her side, she takes a deep breath and begins her journey towards survival, knowing every step matters in the fight to stay alive. The young person woke up to the sound of a man shaking their shoulder. The man told them to get their passport ready because they were approaching a border checkpoint. Still half asleep, the young person looked around and saw they were in a line of cars heading into Canada. After finding their passport, they thought about all the places their mother had taken them before, like Paris and Bangkok, even though they rarely left the airports. At the checkpoint, a border agent leaned into their car and started asking questions. The man handed over their passports and a letter explaining that the young person's father had given permission for them to travel with him. The agent asked the young person directly if this was true, and though uncertain, they nodded and agreed. The agent examined them closely, which made them nervous, but eventually he let them through. Once they were in Canada, the young person asked why they were there, and the man simply replied, "Your dad is here." They drove to a small airfield next to a lake, where a bright yellow plane floated on the water. The man served them dinner sausages with mustard but no ketchup, which he joked about before admitting he had run out. As they ate, the man shared a story about how their father had saved his life during a rafting trip. The young person remembered how their dad used to tell the same story, but in a way that made everyone laugh uncontrollably. Thinking about their dad brought up a mix of emotions, missing him as someone gone from the past and imagining him as part of an uncertain future. The man continued talking throughout the evening, saying odd and random things about life, love, and even moose. He didn't expect answers to his questions, which gave the young person space to think. Despite their confusion and doubts about what was happening, they felt strangely at ease around him. Before the night ended, the man announced they would leave in the morning, as there wasn't enough daylight left for their journey. After the fire, the man found himself surrounded by destruction, but his determination to survive burned brighter. He stood by the lake, the ash-filled air still heavy around him. Though his body ached and exhaustion clung to him, he knew he couldn't linger. He began gathering his few belongings, his movements slow and deliberate as he prepared to move on. The dog stayed close, his loyalty unwavering. The man looked at him, grateful for the companionship even in the darkest moments. Together they started walking toward the trees, their destination uncertain but necessary. Every step was a struggle as pain coursed through the man's body. His ribs ached, and his muscles threatened to give out. But he refused to stop. The duffel bag, tackle box, and rifle weighed heavily on him, a constant reminder of the challenges ahead. As they reached the shelter of the trees, he paused to catch his breath. He couldn't carry everything on his own, and despair began to creep in. His thoughts turned to the person who had brought him here, the one he both blamed and missed. He wished for guidance, for someone to tell him he would be okay, but there was no one. Looking down at the dog, an idea sparked. Perhaps the dog could help him. Though unsure, he decided to try. He carefully fashioned a makeshift harness using his belt and some rope, speaking softly to reassure the animal. At first, the dog hesitated, eyeing the belt with suspicion, but after some coaxing, the man managed to secure it around his loyal companion. The real test came when he attached the duffel bag to the harness. The dog hesitated again, feeling the unfamiliar weight, but with encouragement he began to move, dragging the bag behind him. It wasn't a perfect solution. The bag caught on rocks and sticks, slowing them down, but it eased the man's burden.